A Revolutionary Old Idea, hosted by Mark Gardiner and Steve Stajich.
Hi, welcome to A Revolutionary Old Idea. I'm Mark Gardiner. I'm a former ad agency creative director, an author, a journalist, a screenwriter. My co-host, Steve Stajich, is a television comedy writer. He's a musician, a playwright, a director, general all-around creative type. And together, what we plan to do in Revolutionary Old Idea is introduce our audience to fellow creative professionals and talk about the business of creativity. So our goal for this show is to celebrate uniquely creative individuals who are highly experienced, are still working in whatever their field is, and they're engaged in a myriad of creative pursuits. And a revolutionary old idea is what happens when you mix inspiration with determination and experience. So welcome.
Yes, hello. It's nice to be here. Even digitally these days, it's great to be anywhere, you know. So I am enjoying the experience even up until this point, and looking forward to our first show.
Our guest today is Dr. Fenton. He's one of the world's leading researchers on the human brain. So in terms of a revolutionary old idea, we may be starting with the guy whose expertise is actually the formulation of ideas. So we're going to learn a little bit about what makes us creative types.
Can we just ship him to Washington right now? Can we just do that? They're having a drought on ideas there.
Well, I don't know. I think it might be
They have a lot of bad ideas there. That's what I can say.
That's for sure.
I think it might be a toxic environment for a scientist at this exact moment.
That's probably true.
Okay, well, serious note, Dr. Fenton's a professor at NYU and a neurologist and an expert on what happens in the brain. Actually, tell us what you're an expert in, because I don't know enough to even say what you're an expert in.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm actually not a neurologist. Neurologists are useful. I'm a neuroscientist. I'm the kind of guy who thinks about what neurologists should know. And we think about what neurologists should know, 20, 30, 50 years ahead of their actual implementation of what we should know. As a neuroscientist, I'm the kind of person who, puzzles over how do we think? How do we do the things we do? What is experience? What is a belief? Why is it that some people love others and hate others? All of these kinds of questions that I think most humans wonder, many times during the day. If you're not wondering these things, it's because you didn't think you could get answers. Well, someone like me decided to engage in thinking about my mind, thinking about your mind as a biological machine.
I would think that a lot of this today brushes up against what's becoming, I think, quickly the number one fear of people of my generation. And by the way, I'm 24 years old. And
on what planet?
Yeah. Well, I was in a band for a while, and we partied. Okay, but my generation, which is specifically loss of mind function and specifically memory, I have a lot of interest in that.
So the interesting thing is I started out with, if you will, an ordinary understanding or ordinary conceptualization of memory. So the ordinary conceptualization is that, memory is what we do about our past. We store stuff about our past so we can remember and relive our past. When you study memory long enough, in fact, you don't have to study it that long to realize in a biological system, the same thing that's storing the past, if you will, is also conducting and processing information in the now, and it will be doing so in the future. And so from that point of view, memory is really not at all about the past. It's absolutely about the now, and more profoundly, frankly, it's about the future. And so what brains are doing is storing information about the past, not to recall the past, but to prepare those brains for what comes next and what the next concept is. And so from that point of view, I absolutely worry about my memory, and I worry about your memory, and I worry about your belief systems, because they're actually what's determining how the world operates. Those are the things that determine how you'll perceive the next crisis, how you'll perceive the next opportunity, how you'll perceive the next joke. And those are the things that we are concerned about from the point of view of memory.
Let me ask you this as a way to get into some of the actual mechanics that you are involved with, if I can use that term loosely.
Absolutely.
Mechanics.
The key thing to recognize about this machine, this biological machine that remembers and computes and processes information, it's not like the way an engineer would build it. An engineer builds a computer and says, this piece of the computer does memory. This other piece of the computer, the processor, right, it's going to do computation. This other piece of the processor, it's going to do output. The brain got built where the same stuff is doing the processing, is doing the computation, if you will, is doing the output, okay, and the input, and is being modified in this process. It's a self-organizing machine, and so all of these things are mixed. And so it's very hard to separate what happened to you, what you're currently going to do, and what you're gonna do. They're all part of the same machine, part of the same system.
I'm fascinated by what you just said, Dr. Fenton, and I think what I hear in this is two things. One, something you didn't specifically raise, but I think it goes without saying, is that there's an evolutionary advantage to being able to store memories and remember things, obviously, right? But what you were just saying brings to mind this idea that there is probably a pretty strong relationship between memory and creativity. Do you have a thought or a notion of the relationship between the ability to form memories and the ability to be creative?
If you think about memories as preparing your brain, giving it a set of possibilities, so, based on experience, then absolutely that's the fodder, if you will, for imagination, for what you might call creativity. It's preparing a belief system, a system of possibilities based on your experience that you can draw on to get through the day efficiently, to get yourself out of trouble, to get yourself into trouble if that's what you're looking for, right? And if you want to imagine a future or imagine a set of possibilities, they're usually predicated on those beliefs, on those things that you know are possible.
Is it possible to increase or drive up individual creativity, or does it just have to happen? For example, colleges actually teach creative writing. And I've always been a little suspicious, because I'm like, well, but man, if you can't do it by the time you get to college, So, but here's some money, and I'll take the course. Can you train the brain for creativity?
I'm sure you can. And the reason I say that is not out of experience, it's out of a point of view of how brains work, right? Brains are the best things we know for learning anything. Like, that's all they know how to do. And they don't even learn in a way that is driven by a purposeful learning. They just are learning machines. Imagine what you have in a brain is something like this. 100 billion or so, elements, they're called neurons. They're supported by a whole bunch of other support systems called glial cells. But those 100 or so billion neurons have connections with each other, a quadrillion connections. And when any one of those elements is active, it causes some other element to be active in a network kind of fashion. And when the activities occur, they self-organize. And not only do they self-organize and they make adjustments so that they can continue being self-organized in reliable ways. So that fundamentally is creating something almost out of nothing, but according to some kind of law, right? Some kind of biological law.
If I was stranded on a desert island and I'm the only one there. I have to find drinking water, things to eat, build shelter, and then, of course, figure out how to get cable television. So, because I don't want to miss anything. But my question is that under those conditions, if a human who's been washed ashore used to just be an accountant, has he got no chance of survival over somebody who's been, say, an artist or a painter and has been making creative connections in their head for years?
That's a super interesting question. My guess is that they have as much an opportunity to survive as anyone else, but it'll be determined in the first few days.
Okay, that's good.
Right?
That's good. And then it's all over, and the next castaway can come along.
Yeah, well, in the first couple of days,
use the hut that the guy didn't finish.
Yeah, or you decide, am I going to be an accountant, or it's not that useful for me to be an artist here, actually, or a neuroscientist. I got to look around and find out what it is that I need to survive, to not lose my mind, to entertain myself. And if you can commit to that, I think all humans can, then you have a shot.
Environment has a lot to do with it, though. I mean, here in Los Angeles, we all have to learn how to be patient, to drive, etc. And so, adaptation, whatever that is adaptation's basically a creative thing, isn't it?
Yeah, adaptation is a creative thing on a really long time scale. We call it evolution time scale, right? So for tens of thousands of years, our species is changing, its tendencies, it's changing, its actual abilities, it's even changing the species because it's beneficial to adapt. It's beneficial to figure out how to make more food out of little resources. It's beneficial to figure out how to cool yourself when the temperature gets extreme. It's beneficial to figure out how to get on with your neighbors in a way that is fair and equitable so you don't end up killing each other.
Here's a question that I've been wondering from Andre, from your perspective, as you are thinking about what's actually happening in the brain, as people are forming memories, forming ideas, all these things, what's going on in here? Is it reasonable to say that some people are more creative than others at the level of individual cells or whatever they are? Or is it just that we recognize creativity in some people? We recognize, okay, Beethoven was really creative. Mozart was very creative. Steve was maybe dissing accountants because I think some accountants are very creative, but they go to jail. Okay.
The best ones don't.
Jail now.
But are we all creative? Are some of us more creative than others?
Yeah, so we have to recognize that as far as we know, we meaning neuroscientists and people who study minds, creativity is not like in a particular gene or in a particular cell or even a particular part of the brain. It's something that seems to emerge, and that's what the research suggests. There's not a lot of research into this, as you can imagine. And the research suggests that creativity is something that you can recognize when the following things happen. The several parts of the brain that interact with each other. It's called the default mode network. This is what you activate when you're just sort of sitting there and you're doing like self-reflection. It's not necessarily a good thing, frankly. It's even a bad thing, and meditation practices kind of teach you not to do that. But when you explore internally, if you will, on the one hand. On the other hand, you need something judicious. So there's other networks in your brain that are good at saying, like, do that, direct that thought. Don't just mind wander, but mind wander in that direction. And then there's a saliency network. There's a network, another set of activities in the brain that says, that was interesting. That is remarkable. When those three things interact, we recognize it as creative.
Boy, that you just, what you said just makes me wonder. We're increasingly living in a digital environment where other people, other companies, algorithms, machine learning, AI are deciding what's interesting for us, which is sort of terrifying. And for you as a real brain guy, Is there a threat? Is there a threat to the brain in the environment that we live in now?
I think of it as there's a threat and a challenge and an opportunity, right? They all come down to the following. Yes, if someone wants to, quote, I'll just say it in the extreme way, enslave your mind, okay, by determining what it is that you will think about and where your attention will go, massive threat. On the other hand,
You're talking about Pornhub, right?
yes and no. I don't know what you're talking about.
Enslave anyone's mind, not my mind. Okay, all right.
And on the other hand,
I don't even know what that is, to be clear.
Yeah.
I read about it once. And on the
That's
other
great.
hand,
That's great.
and on the other hand, you have a really interesting challenge, because this is in some sense an assault on your freedom of mind. And when met with that challenge, there's an opportunity to succumb to it, but there's also an opportunity to rise to it. And rising to it will require all of your wits, all of your creativity, because these are super well targeted efforts. But in understanding them, in understanding the nature of your opportunities, in understanding your mind, I personally see this as a way forward, which is to recognize what the damage and the danger is, and to try to be creative in taking the benefits of that opportunity and turning them into my own personal well-being. And all of that really requires me to get better control of my mind.
What about us? Is creativity essential for humans? Could we survive without creativity, or is creativity an essential part of our existence?
I think creativity is essential, and in fact, it's going to become more essential. Just look at the last 5-10 years, right? There are enormous numbers of technologies that we have created and that we are using. And those technologies themselves are designed to, in a sense, harvest our creativity, harvest our attention, harvest our mental cognitive resources. And, you know, if you play along, it feels fine, but it's not, the data doesn't say it's helping us. In fact, the data say it's harming us. But these are things that our economic systems have created. These are things that our political systems have created and harnessed, not necessarily for our individual well-being, but for the systems that deploy them's well-being. And I think the only way out, frankly, the only optimistic way to manage these technologies, and this has happened in the past before, is for us to be creative.
When you talk about that, I can't help but think about how such a large portion of society is aging, is getting older. There is a lot to back up the notion that later in life, certain skills and so forth actually come to the fore, and people get better at what they're doing. Classical musicians who continue to play well into their 80s, people who painted into their 90s, and so on. What do you see as the relationship between creativity and aging?
So I think I mentioned earlier that for me, creativity doesn't emerge from a vacuum. It doesn't emerge from the void, if you will. It emerges from beliefs. And those beliefs come from experience. You have a certain set of ways of thinking about the world, a certain set of ways of reacting to the world. And experience is the best teacher of those things. You know, reading about these things, right, being told about these things is one thing, but experiencing them in your own idiosyncratic personal way builds the strongest convictions about those beliefs. And if those beliefs are well curated, right, and they're well honed, and they're in a sense perfected, I don't think we know anything more powerful than that, from which to launch, if you will, a thought, or to launch an argument, or to face a challenge. And so we call this wisdom, right? And so these beliefs, when organized in the correct way and then directed towards what most humans would recognize as, beneficial, not only for the individual, but for the community, we call that wisdom. And people who have lived longer tend to have more wisdom. And it's not surprising if the wisdom doesn't come from the void, but it comes from experience.
That's terrific. I'm looking forward to that.
This notion of experience and wisdom possibly enabling creativity sort of might go against another popular idea that young people have all the new great ideas. And sometimes I think young people have great ideas that they'll do something fantastic because they don't realize that you can't do it that way. It turns out, and they don't know what they don't know, and they rush in, and it turns out, whoa, we always thought you couldn't do it that way, but in fact you can. And so, talk about this notion that the balance between wisdom and experience versus that willingness of youth to just jump into something and try it for the first time. Let's see how it goes. Are those different ways of being creative, or are they fundamentally the same thing, just done by different people?
The creativity comes, as I assert, from beliefs, from ideas about how the world operates. And so on the one hand, you have a set of beliefs that have been tried and true and are stable, if you will, and so can be counted on in a moment of crisis, for example, or in a moment of dire need. That's what we call wisdom on this continuum. On the other hand, because they are tried and true, and because times change, and because the facts of the world change, maybe the fundamental laws don't change, but the way politics operates and the way what other people's beliefs change, that those ideas, those beliefs become ossified, they become old, they become stale, they don't allow for the creativity that they once did. Right? But that doesn't mean to get rid of all old people or all old ideas. That just means you have to recognize that these things come from a set of beliefs. And not having the burden of old beliefs or beliefs that are now are now less effective, or in fact even wrong, okay, allows one who isn't burdened by that quote-unquote knowledge. One of my mentors used to love to say, I am not burdened by knowledge. And right, and that allows you to be creative, if you will, because you're unburdened by that. I'll give you a really maybe controversial but a really interesting idea. Most humans today, okay, especially in America, understand that there's an idea. It's called race. Okay? But it's an idea. It's actually a wrong idea. There's no valid reason, there's no biological basis of this idea. But it governs so much of what we're doing. Okay? And there's no easy way to deal with that and reject that idea. It will take people dying before they can rid themselves of the consequences of that bad idea. So there are many creative opportunities for humanism, for engaging with people, economic possibilities, medical possibilities that are constrained by this wrong, bad, demonstrably, inaccurate idea. But we have to live with it. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so it's very unlikely that we old, wise people who have lived our entire lives, structured not only in our own actions, but structured in the infrastructures that we have built, in the institutions that we have built around that idea, it's very hard for us to expect, or anyone else to expect us to act as if those ideas were evaporated and gone. Okay? It relies on a child who hasn't lived with those ideas and who has the hope of not living with those ideas to show us the way.
Now I'm wondering, Mark, is it time, that time that we hit sometimes where it's time for a revolutionary old idea?
Sure. Maybe it is a good time for that. Every episode of this podcast will explore a revolutionary old idea, which is to say an idea that has perhaps come and gone and is now coming back, or an idea or a technology or an approach that is being reapplied, is being used in a new way. And it's a perfect time to explore a revolutionary old idea.
The one we've got for this episode is quite simply the idea that maybe newspapers, printed on paper newspapers, might come back. And where we saw this story was in an online piece, dichotomy. What happened was this. There's a public relations outfit in Glasgow called appropriately the Newspaper Club. Now, I don't think their name is wholly involved, means they're wholly involved with the resurrection of newspapers, but to tout their PR outfit called the Newspaper Club, they're printing a little newspaper and they're handing it out for free. And it's a tabloid. It's called the printing press, and people are getting information about their services that they would otherwise have to either go online for or receive in some other way, maybe as a television commercial or something. Do they have those in Scotland? I'm not sure. I know they have delicious drinks over there. So I thought that this was kind of cool. Now, I don't know that they're exactly bringing newspapers back. And further, I'm not sure newspapers are coming back. The Wall Street Journal, there's no newspaper in America that has a circulation of more than 500,000. That's kind of surprising. You'd think the New York Times, right, would be up in the millions or something like that, especially globally or whatever. But I think the point here is that an old idea of a printed newspaper is being utilized to some extent to make this public relations company look kind of edgy and today. And so that's very good, because what that means is some of my old pants are coming back and I can wear those now. And I hope plaid is on its way back in. But as usual on these things, I like to just offer my spin on where this could go. If Starbucks coffee, and you've probably heard of them, they have over 80,000 stores in 80 countries. They could print a newspaper, and you could read it while you were in there sucking down their $7 cappuccinos or whatever the hell they are. And sure, they're going to be rolling and tossing around in the parking lot and so forth. But that might, my point, I guess, is maybe it's not for media companies to bring back newspapers, but maybe for somebody like Starbucks to bring back newspapers.
Yeah, this is kind of a fascinating story. The Newspaper Club want to use this newspaper idea as a brand storytelling vehicle. What's fascinating about the newspaper presentation is that it goes against this notion that we're bombarded with, and we're constantly being manipulated by algorithms that are trying to show us exactly what we as individuals want to see. And I think there's something refreshing about the Newspaper Club. It's a branding agency. They want to convey brand messages, so obviously it's curated in that sense, but they're giving us something that we are all going to see the same version of, which is in a way refreshing. One of the things that we've lost as a culture is that we don't have these as many shared experiences anymore. I always felt that reading a physical newspaper forced me to at least see a collection of stories that were not curated for me personally, but were but were curated in a general way for the entire audience of the New York Times. And it caused me to be exposed to ideas that I wouldn't have sought out, that probably someone wouldn't have fed me, an algorithm wouldn't have fed me. I would see things juxtaposed. Are there fundamental differences, do you think, to the way we did it versus this thing that we're doing now, which, yes, of course, they're very good at making it addictive, but are they actually hurting us in terms of our ability to gather a lot of different ideas?
Imagine if your motivation was not to be comfortable, was not to be entertained, but was to be educated. Okay? Would you choose a narrow path? Would you choose one thing to become informed about? Okay? My goal is to be educated. I want to understand how everything works, right? So I pay for I'm one of the few that pays for that subscription. I might not even look at it on Sunday, but on maybe even 2 Sundays later, we don't throw them away fast enough. You turn, and by chance, remember the subway, the New York City subway? When you ride the New York City subway, you run into people you would never ordinarily meet. You can learn things from the people that you're afraid of. You can learn things from the people you're attracted to, right? We tend to construct our lives as if they can be perfectly curated. And what is super clear to people who study the mind, okay, to people who study education and study how we learn, is variety is one of the best teachers. A lot of what I do and a lot of the creativity that I appear to have was because I had a conversation 10 years ago. Or I met a dude who said something really weird to me, but today makes sense. And so I personally cherish, in fact, I do something very deliberate. When I feel uncomfortable about something, I do it. Because that, for me, has the most value, most likely to be valuable experience.
My personal feeling is that the paper newspapers, and maybe we should say it, paper newspapers of yore, or days of old, they represented consensus. In other words, by the time you traveled from the front to the back of it, you had sort of a sense of what folks were thinking or talking about. Now, it's true, people like Hearst and so forth, they sort of steered the car the way they wanted it to go. But now what we have is this pick and choose building of your own information grid. And are we being selective, highly creative, or just hiding out in our own personal rabbit holes?
We understand how information is transmitted and transacted with. Not everyone has access to the same information. If you pay more, you can get different information and so on. But at the same time, we also realize that the selectivity of what you feed on, literally that's what we're doing today, determines your point of view. It determines your beliefs. If you take the thesis of where we began today, it determines your future. You'll choose in a consequential way because you only have a small piece of what the puzzle is. And some people have a different piece. And some people are excluded from some pieces and so on. This has enormous consequences for how we work together. It has enormous consequences for how we manage conflict. It has enormous consequences for when our belief systems don't agree with each other, right? And the evidence on which those belief systems are built are incompatible, right? There is no way to resolve that conflict. And so I think this is a very, very troubling and problematic consequence of the self-curated feeding, if you will, of the mind.
Talk about the relationship between the brain, the way brains work, the way artificial intelligence could work, and let's explore the idea, if you will, of could a machine be creative?
AI has been tremendous, and it's true. AI has been challenging to our basic concept of how we know things. We used to think, hey, if I know something, I can build a thing, right, to demonstrate that knowledge. It turns out the AI systems, especially these large language models, right, these very, very, if you will, dense neural networks where there are many, many layers, so many you can't count them and not know what they do. Okay? It turns out that those processing systems are very effective. We can see the results of their effectiveness, but we can't understand how they do it. Humans can make this thing so that it can produce that terrific result that you're interested in. You can't even understand how it did it.
I'm wondering if, in regard to creativity, if there's any actual way to measure it. I mean, besides output, one could look at someone's creative works or read their books and go, but and read others and go, this person's a genius. So, but is there something in science that possibly measures creativity?
So it's an interesting question. Before you can measure something, you need to understand it. And we don't understand it. What we've seen is that there's no gene, there's no thing, there's no particular part of the brain, but there's a set of interactions across brain areas that you can measure in a human. And it goes back to recognizing that there are three of these coordinated networks. One is the, I'm navel gazing network, right, my default mode network. There's the, I am actually using my saliency network, the thing that says, oh, that's interesting or that is remarkable. And also this other network that says, hey, you should focus on that. Pay attention to this kind of thing. These activity patterns across the brain of these three systems seem to be entwined or engaged in a way that's related to what is measured as creative output or creative generation. So, yeah, we might be able to measure this one day, but today that's the best that we can do.
Since it appears that we can see things happening that we correlate with creativity, I wonder, and we all have these notions of what happened to Einstein's brain after he died. Could you see anything in the brains of Sorry, my dog is sure someone's coming to kill me. Could you see?
Again.
Would you be able to see any difference, a physical difference in the brain of very creative people compared to schmoes like me?
It's a good question. The first thing is you have to define your belief about what it is that you could find. So if creativity was a part of the brain or three parts of the brain, then we should be able to find bigger or softer or fluffier or some kind of difference in those three parts. If, on the other hand, creativity is not a part, but is how the system works together, it'll be very, very hard to go and look for that in a non-functioning brain. The creativity is a process that is a computation that emerges from the operations of the perhaps ordinary parts that happen to be well tuned together, right? And so it depends on what this will work out to be. And I started with, we're not sure. The first fact is, from what it looks like, it's one of these functional interactions. So it may not be obvious that you'll find in a dead brain, in a non-working brain, a lump or a gene or a particular density of one thing or a paucity of another. Because the way we'll recognize that is by their output that we have judged to be creative, which, the judger, who knows, are the judges able to actually judge creativity? Is creativity really coming up with 1,000 ways of using this object that I'm showing here? I don't know.
What about the enlightened brain? What about if you had a Buddhist monk with great wisdom and you hook sensors up to him? Would you expect to see, with all the time spent on internal thinking and so forth, or reflective thinking, would you expect to see something a little different?
So that's fascinating. It's something I'm really interested in. Yes, you can recognize the electrical activity in a brain that is well trained in meditation, right? Which tend to be people who have devoted themselves to this, like monks who are Buddhists and so on. People who have that practice, you can recognize that the electrical activity in their brain has different patterns. Okay? Those patterns are not subtle, they're not like gross, they're relatively subtle. It's not like they don't have a brain or they're using the left side of the brain, whereas everyone uses the right. They're rather subtle, but they're recognizable. Okay? And that is what's I think important about that, and it comes back to who's creative. Okay? These people, they're people, first of all, okay? And they come to their talent by training. They don't come to their talent. The belief system it's not that you're suddenly born this way.
Quick question about memory, and then I think we got to go. I love my girlfriend because we've been together for 30 plus years, and I have all the memory of that. Were that to be those memories to somehow be erased, would the next day I get up, I assume with a bandage on my head, and find her and fall in love all over again?
I don't want to answer this question, first of all.
Can I ask your wife? Would you mind if I asked your wife?
First, because I don't know the answer, but I can. It's my job. I can tell you how I would think about that. Okay? If we agreed that you made all of your choices today only because of the explicit ability to recollect that past with her, then I have it's going to be bad for you and her. Okay? Okay? But because you've lost that. Okay? But if we agree that you didn't actually only store those past events in your brain, what you did was you built a set of beliefs about the world and a set of beliefs about your partner that are abstracted from the details of the memories, that abstracted from the details of the experiences, then maybe that's kind of the best. You have an understanding, you have a set of expectations. Those expectations are not unusual, right? The evidence upon which those expectations may be gone, because we, did whatever we did with the bandage on your head. Okay? But going forward, right, your belief systems are where they are just before you had the surgery. It's not a novel experiment, right? We have this experiment all the time, if you will, because people enter and leave our lives. Some, dramatically through death, okay, and others through simple separations. But I think that that's the key insight, that what I think we as a culture, as a society, have to recognize. We have put so much stake, if you will, and value on our memories, when we have failed to recognize that those memories get abstracted by our minds. We don't live in the details of them. In fact, it's not a good idea to live in the details of the memories, right? But rather in their gist, in what they mean for us.
So, Andre, I'm curious to know if there are any popular misconceptions about creativity.
There are a bunch of things I think about creativity. The thing that troubles me most about the way people use creativity is that creativity today seems to be so revered that it's revered almost without conscience or without recognizing its consequence. Just because I can imagine a different way of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and it may actually be a ultimately better way, does not mean that that is a valuable idea because of the harm it could cause.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't need to be the most efficient form of human. We don't need to be the most productive society. These are aspirations, and there are many creative ways you can accomplish some of these things, and they are recognized and revered and very often rewarded. But when I hear that, I take pause, and I think of suffering, and I think of joy, and I think of happiness, and I think of all of these facets of humanness and of life. But the creativity that we truly value, I think, needs to be, if you will, tempered, encapsulated, contextualized in humanity.
Well,
Wow.
that's beautiful. And I see by that old clock on the wall. Wait a minute. There is no clock on the wall. Okay. By my memory of the clock we used to have on the wall, that it's time for us to say adieu. Dr. Andre Fenton, thank you ever so much, not just for your brilliance, but for rearranging every piece of furniture in your home today so that we could have a nice picture of you. I appreciate that, and I think I speak for furniture-moving scientists everywhere.
It's been really fun, guys. This has been a terrific conversation. In fact, I had no idea we would have this conversation quite the way we did, so thank you very much. I'm going to now go and try and be creative at the local pub.
Okay, I thought you were going to say, I'm going to try to unremember this afternoon.
No, I'm going to accomplish that at the local pub.
All
Okay,
right.
beautiful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.